Yes, I get what you're saying.
This meeting of the Board of Education is now called to order. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. To welcome everyone to our meeting tonight, and we'll start by approving our agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda as presented?
Mr. President, I'd like to, that we add a closed session as allowed by the Open Meetings Act, Section 8E, to discuss litigation and settlement strategy regarding the Coffron versus PPS and others lawsuit. And then if that could be followed by, when we go back into open session, at least an opportunity to take action on the same.
Thank you. Anything else? There's a motion on page 2 to approve the amended agenda. Is there a motion, please?
President Van Antwerp, I move that the Board of Education approve the agenda as amended.
Thank you, Terry. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Emily. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes, and the amended agenda is approved. And we'll go right to the superintendent's report.
Well, thank you. We have 3 items on the report this evening, and the first is to give you an update on our community teen read event that's coming up, and Sarah Brown and Lisa Miller are here to talk to you about that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Ree Lang and members of the board. Thank you so much for having us and giving us a few minutes to share some exciting events that are coming up with our libraries or in conjunction with. This is probably the 8th year I've stood up in front of you to share the community teen read, and we're just really excited to still have the excitement and the energy going forward to connect teens with our community. This year's read that we've chosen is the book Salt to the Sea. The author Ruta Cepetis is going to be at the Portage Senior Center on March 19th to speak to us. Salt to the Sea is a book that is historical fiction, and the most basic summary of it is there's numerous, I'll say young adults or youth who are fleeing from Lithuania and Poland during World War II. And it culminates with this historical event, a catastrophe that's little known. The chapters are short, it's a very quick read. The feedback we've been getting from students has been really good. And then I also just want to mention that funding for this year's event, the Portage Education Foundation was gracious enough to take this on and help fund this along with the Beam Family Literacy Endowment. So a special thanks to them for being a part of this. We've got some other donors as well.
And we still have the core group of our team, which is the 2 high school librarians from Portage Public Schools, Portage District Library, and the Book Bug. We're kind of the committee that works every year to choose the books. We've been doing this since 2015, so we're almost coming up on our 10-year anniversary of doing community. We're also very thankful to the Zhang Portage Senior Center, who has been gracious enough to host our event for the last couple of years, and that's where we'll be again this year. Sarah told you a little bit about the book. We have some copies of the book that we'd be happy to leave with you, pass around. Maybe Terry, you might have first dibs on one of those books. And then we just want to make sure that you know that you're invited to all of our community events. So the author will be here March 18th and 19th, visiting both of our schools. So I believe that event is going to be during third hour, about 9:30. That's usually when we have that. You're invited to our school events, or of course the evening event, which would be Tuesday evening, 6:30 at the Senior Center. And just a little bit of point of pride, we do have a lot of students reading this book this year. Between the classes that have already read it, currently reading it, and will read it, we have about 40 classes, including community high this year, which we're really, really excited about. And then just a last little plug, we have another book with us. We have another author coming to the Portage community that we just wanted you to know about, Firekeeper's Daughter, written by Angeline Booley. And this is part of the Great Michigan Read. This is a program by the Michigan Humanities Council. Every other year, they pick a book written by a Michigan author and encourage as many people in Michigan to read the book. They schedule these author tours, so they send the author all around the state of Michigan, and we're really fortunate that she's coming to Portage in April. So if you'd like a copy of her books, we have that, and please attend that event too. Happy to answer any questions you might have. And yes.
Any chance any of these events are video accessible?
You know, usually that's part of our contract. This year, I've been working directly with her assistant, so it's an easy question for me to ask. Usually what they say is that it's for archival purposes only. Sometimes they allow, after the event, the freedom of opening it up for about an hour. I'm not sure in this case, since she's traveling, if that's something she'll do or not, so hard to say on that.
Yeah, and we'll ask about the Great Michigan Read, even if our event isn't accessible. Maybe they have one that is on their website that you'd be able to watch, but we'll ask about that.
Yeah, even if it wouldn't matter if it were the student presentations or the public one in the evening, but it would just be nice to have access to be able to see that if you can't be there.
Yeah, we'll inquire.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Good question.
Just thanks for doing this, and Sarah, thanks for lending me a copy a month ago. I read it, it's great. I think Keith got the handoff, and great book. And thanks for the shout out to the Beams for their generous
Yes.
support.
So great.
And Bob Benedict
Yes.
for literacy.
Mrs. Beam, for people who don't know, was one of our reading specialists in the district for many, many years. So a lot of people do know her in the community, and that's a great support of something that she was instrumental in promoting.
Thank you,
Well,
everyone.
thank you. And
I'll vouch for the Firekeeper's Daughter. It's a great read as well.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much, we appreciate it.
Flyers out on the table advertising the evening event if anyone here wants to take one.
I'm all set.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, our next two reports, the bond project update and change order summary, will be headed by Johnny Edwards. So, Johnny, it's all yours.
All right, thank you Superintendent V. Lang as well as reports about Board of Education. In regards to our construction update, Central L first, the second floor is now being constructed with precast concrete. The block has started as well on the second floor. The brick veneer is being constructed on the exterior of the main office. So the building is really starting to take shape. As the masonry continues, the electricians follow them to make sure all the end walls are going as planned. Haverhill, as you know, we staggered that. Precast bearing is ongoing with about half of the building complete. That portion of the precast bearing continues in the other portions of the building. The crane has now arrived, so we expect the precast concrete to start in the next couple of weeks, followed by steel roughly a month from now. At the next board meeting, I'll share a few photos with you of both of our sites. And then over to Woodland, we held an engagement session with the Woodland staff on January 31st. During the session, we worked to make sure that the initial design direction was consistent with what the staff reported to us. We discussed some of the barriers as well as there are more emerging things that they had identified. Staff overall endorsed the direction we're headed with the board, with the site design. We then held our third schematic design meeting last week, and during this meeting we discussed the site concept plan. We looked at some 3D views, and then we discussed parity between the first two schools and the design thus far with Woodland. So that concludes my construction updates. I'll be happy to answer any questions before we get to the change order summaries.
We're good, thank you.
All right, so I am now going to ask Dan Rathburn from OAK to talk you through the change order summary two.
Great, thank you, Johnny. So to start out, we added another sheet to your report, and that sheet is a summary of both the active projects, Central Elementary and Haverhill. That is broken down into two pieces. One of them deals with construction and shows the changes in relation to the construction budgets. The next piece is how that affects contingency. So for the most part, if you look down at the bottom, the construction and contingency total for each project and for both together, moving forward, you'll see very little change in those numbers. Because most of the changes that we are going to incur are going to come out of contingency. So when you see changes to those numbers, it will be something from below the construction line, owner allowances and budgets, and or movement of dollars into the projects or out of the projects. Any questions on that sheet? Okay, we'll move over to the Central Elementary change report. And our first item is Bulletin 2. Updates to structural metals and masonry work and electrical fire alarm changes. And that was $49,098, and it affected 6 contractors. Our next item is Bulletin 5, structural updates, precast opening supports required for duct penetrations, and some mechanical updates, updated the route of or for overflow piping. And that was $34,921 and affected 9 contractors. Our third item is early lintel release. It was early order and adjustment of lintels for field coordination to keep the project on schedule and maintain consistency throughout the project. And that was $5,059 and affected 1 contractor. We're going to have a number of these that are really schedule related and trying to push things along and prevent any slowdowns. And that takes us to 4 lintel updates, revised lintels per the submittals. That was $3,789. And we expedited galvanizing, and that was of the steel beam lintels for $3,105. And then we had some additional masonry work due to the timing of return structural shops. The walls were already complete prior to the bearing plates arriving on the job site, so we had to compensate the mason for coming back and filling those holes that were left for $4,973. Item 7 was addressing the duct openings. We directed the mason to install bond beams at a number of small mechanical openings for duct work. Based on the size opening, we were looking at and typical install methods. We proceeded with a bond beam at certain duct openings, and then that direction was given also to keep on schedule, $7,635. Item 8 was relocate the unit ventilator to accommodate structural piers. In the field, we caught a conflict between the unit ventilator, heater, and structural piers. We were directed by Tower Pinkster to move it to a new location to relocate the UV heaters outside of the piers. The wall was already partially constructed at this time, and that's why we have a cost of $910. Updated perf, not right, from the updated perf-based CMU to raised block or brick. And that was an add of $48,126. So the product that was originally spec'd, we got some feedback from subcontractors that there were issues. And so the team looked at providing a more traditional product with the glazed brick. And then a cabinet scope move, cost to move the specialty corner bookcases from Architectural Systems Group, which is a cabinet manufacturer. And we moved that to Hazelhoff, who is our general trades contractor and performing the millwork. And this, we would ensure the seamless color match between products in that area. And that was an ad of 1,712, affected 2 contractors. Total for change order 2 at Central Elementary was $159,328. Do you have any questions?
Dan, could you kind of put in perspective, for especially our newer board members, are these types of change orders pretty typical on a project our size and of the scope?
They're very typical. And if you'll notice certain types of change orders taking place at certain times and on certain projects. So one of the things we'll get into at Haverhill is on suitable soils. And there's going to be a lot of changes, not this time necessarily, but next time, where we're dealing with unsuitable soils and the ramifications of that with temp roads and stuff on site. So early on, code issues, structural issues, and soil conditions and site conditions are usually what we'll see the most of.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move over to Haverhill Elementary. And our first item there is to reroute existing storm line. It was found that a 10-inch storm drain from the existing school was not shown on the plans and was causing flooding in the school. So that was $10,771, and that affected one contractor. And we were directed by Portage Public Schools to add a mulch pathway to the playground to replace the dirt pathway coming off the parking lot. That was an ad of $2,701. And then our third item was added thickness of all exterior wall insulation, cost difference to get proper R value. And it went from 3 to 4 inches, and that was an ad of $3,100. Item 4 was on suitable footing soil, replacement of unsuitable soil at the building footing location. And that was $39,364 in effect of one contractor. And then we had an added temp driveway, and that was $9,014 in effect of one contractor. And as I stated, we're gonna see a lot more of that as we move forward. That takes us to a total of $64,950 for Haverhill Change Order 2. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks,
John.
Dan.
That's it on those, superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. We're at our comments and communications section. Are there any board members that have any comments this evening?
Sure. So I, and actually Randy too, had the opportunity to go to Portage Northern's sports improv theater performance a couple weeks ago. It was definitely interesting, different, crazy, kind of fun. So kudos to them for doing that. I also got to go to Mean Girls at Portage Central over the weekend, and stellar performance there by everybody. So that was great. And I don't know if you all saw on Wood TV that they highlighted a Portage Northern graduate, Derek Cobbs, who was actually in the backup band for Usher's performance at the Super Bowl last night. My son happened to be in band with Derek Cobbs at Portage Northern, so that was really pretty cool. We've seen him be interviewed about supporting Nicki Minaj and some of the other people that he tours with, but there was a real hometown connection at the Super Bowl, so that was a cool deal. So,
Thanks, Terry. Anyone else?
Well, Randy, I just thank my colleagues for a good retreat today, spirited. There were times when we argued about specific words, and then there were times when we were talking about higher level expectations for how the district performs. So, good work. Look forward to more in the future.
Thanks, Paul. Anyone else? I just wanted to make a comment about the school tours that the board has been taking. We've completed 4, and they've just been excellent, very eye-opening to see all the good work that's going on in our schools firsthand. So if you can make those tours, it's worth your time. Our next tour is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at Central Elementary. And with that, we'll move to the consent agenda. We have two big items on there this evening. One is to approve the minutes from the January 29, 2024 special meeting, closed session, and regular business meeting. The other is to approve the following policy revisions. 0122, board powers. Policy 1420, school administrator evaluation. Policy 3120, employment of professional staff. 3130, placement. 3131, staff reduction and recalls. 3132, vacancies. 3139, staff discipline. 3140, termination and resignation. 3142, probationary teachers. And 3220, professional staff evaluation. And these were presented to the board at our meeting last week, and they are all operational policies except for board powers, which is a board bylaw. Are there any exceptions to the consent agenda as written? Very good, then it's, the consent agenda is approved. And we'll now move to page 34, assurance of district performance, and we're going to be discussing monitoring report 1.5.
Okay. Hopefully you had a chance to look at it beginning on page 35, and I did make a note there that two things. Number one, this policy used to be a different numbered policy. It's now 1.5 that replaced another one. That's part of the work that you did in eliminating one and reordering others and then creating a new one. So this is the fifth of 5 end statements. And one of the things that's changed in this particular report is the definition of some of the terms that are used to help us understand students' ethical behavior. And we've always presented on these areas, but we've never had comparable data to look at, either state or national level. So the terms are slightly changed, and I've made note of what those are, and the definitions have changed just a little bit, so that primarily so it gives us information at both the national and state level that we can access to compare and give us some sense of how our students are doing compared to other students around the country and around the state. So so we're still measuring the same sorts of things. We're measuring students who are chronically absent, students who are victims of violent crimes, illegal possession of substances, theft, and then student attendance. So I have the new definitions there, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. And the interpretations for the others, for students' respect for individual differences remains the same, and then the report for that also remains the same. Ethical behavior also remains the same, so there are no changes there, just some minor updates to the report. But I bring your attention to, on page 40 of the board packet, where there are beginning of several charts that are there. And the first one is around chronically absent students. And again, I was able to, or Melissa basically, who does a lot of our data reporting, was able to go back a number of years to find information that was provided at the state level. And you can see the top line is state level information, the gray line, the blue line is Portage Public Schools, and you can see that our chronically absent rate parallels what's happening around the state, but we are several percentage points less, which is good in this particular case, of students who are chronically absent. And if you go back to what that definition is, it's students who have missed 10% or more possible days during the scheduled school year. And this is my school data that we're getting that from. So all the state data is coming from my school data. Some of the charts show national data, and that's coming from NCES, which is the National Center for Education Statistics. And then the opposite of kind of the chronically absent is the attendance rate for Portage schools, and again, we're above 93%, which is also above the state average there and seems to parallel what's happening at the state level there. On page 41, victims of violent crime, and that definition is different than what we had there before, but it tracks the number of students who have been victims of violent criminal offenses on school property or at a school-sponsored event. And there's a qualifier there that official written complaints have to be submitted to law enforcement and to school officials in order for that to be considered. So those numbers are fairly low, but I guess the intent there was to give us some comparison to see how our students are doing with other students. So you'll again see very similar pattern, and any deviation is usually like one student or so that makes a difference in the data that you're looking at. Bullying is another one that we track, and again, we're very similar to what's happening around the state with our students. Expulsions, total expulsions are relatively low, as they are in the state. You know, we're trying to do a lot of work with restorative practices and try to do what we can to not expel students except when either we're required to by law or the offenses are such that the rest of our students are not safe around these students. Illegal possession is one that speaks to the drug possession of either prescription or non-prescription drugs, and and their use. The National Center solicits information for every 2 years on these last two charts. So we will not get information until the end of this year to do that final comparison. So it's awful hard to draw any conclusions about what's happening there, other than I think we've brought to the board before that some of the behaviors of our students have changed since COVID, and not necessarily for the better. And this seems to be one area where that is at least a local trend. I'm not sure what that is at the national level. So when that information becomes available, it'll be included in this chart. And then theft, which is another thing that we track, is also, again, looking at the information we have, it's similar to what, it's not very high numbers to begin with, but it's similar to what's happening around the country. So those are the bulk of the changes in this report. Like I said, the rest, respect for individual differences. You have a listing of what is available to our students in achieving that end, and the same with respect for cultures other than their own. That information is there. And then the last thing that we've been providing for the last few years is just a snapshot, and this is not part of the monitoring report, but it seems to be helpful information to have as we try to build a more diverse staff, is trying to get our employee staffing to be similar to our student makeup, and we've got a long ways to go on that, as you can see, and there's not much significant deviation from what we've had in the past. It really involves like one or two people, in spite of our efforts to diversify our staff. We create a position of retention and recruitment specialist. I think I've got that backwards, recruitment and retention specialist, that is working with us to address this and try to get our employee group looking similar to our student body. So, be happy to answer any questions that you have in this report.
Mark, do you know if on the illegal possession, that includes like alcohol and vaping products and cigarettes and things that are illegal for people under 21?
So if you read the description, I don't think it includes everything that you mentioned. It's illegal possession as the distribution, possession, or use of illegal drugs. I don't think tobacco is classified as a drug, nor do I believe alcohol is, but I'm not sure. Or the inappropriate distribution, possession, or use of prescription drugs. So I don't think it includes
Okay.
that at that level.
I just thought that might explain what looks to be a spike up there, that there still is a pervasive thought process among teens about vaping and smoking and all of that. So I just was looking for
Well, vaping, if it
Potential.
contains
cannabis.
THC, I guess would fall in that category, and you know, that's become a little more prevalent. I don't have any hard data to give you, but I know that, you know, vaping is still an issue for
Yeah.
us in our schools.
Yeah, just thought, no,
Yeah.
no expected answer.
I would add, Mark, I really appreciate you including the diversity in the schools and workforce. I mean, it's a chance for us every year to get this data, and I'll be uncomfortable with it. And you don't make excuses, and you own it, and I appreciate that. You know, we've got a ways to go, and I mean, I think the thing that jumps out to me in the ethnicity is every year it changes just a little bit. I mean, and we're becoming this, you know, a more diverse community. And the number now of the ethnicity of our of the kids in the schools is now 68.7% white. So, you know, that continues to decrease. And so, anyway, our community is changing, and appreciate you including the data, and look forward in future years of chipping away at getting our staff to be more reflective of the kids.
You know, I met recently with the Dean of the College of Education at Western, and they are having a hard time recruiting teachers of color into their programs. They just are not out there. I'm not sure what's happening, why we can't make any inroads on that, but it's hard to hire teachers if they're not going into education. So we've got to find, as a society, ways to get our students interested in education, and all types of students, to make sure they're in the right career pathway.
Any other questions?
With respect for individual differences, could you highlight way or two that students are learning about neurodiversity, or even students with disabilities and inclusion?
Well, at the secondary level, the Moose Club, it would be one of those. I mean, the Moose Club has, that has an intention behind it to connect students who are different in terms of ability. Mm-hmm. And so that's one that's happening at the secondary level. I don't know as if they have similar programs at the elementary level, but you know, many of our teachers are teaching tolerance, and I think students are seeing different behaviors, and it gives us an opportunity to really talk about what those differences are, and why we're seeing certain behaviors, and trying to build a greater tolerance for that.
Excellent, thank
Would
you.
a peer-to-peer program be something that would include that?
Sure.
It seems like on our visits, we've heard about peer-to-peer at the 3 elementaries that we visited, and some of the challenges that they faced with that, and how they're trying to address those. And so it really does seem like it would fit right under that category.
Sure. Thank you for noticing that.
Yeah.
And, I should have had your question turned over to Terry.
No, I
So
just,
thank
it
you.
was something that was impressive, where they have students that have mentees, and that they're friends on the playground and help them out in situations, and it's a real life practice of that.
Thank you. I know it's happening. I wanted to see it highlighted, so thank you.
Any other comments, questions for Mark? Well, Mark, I just want to say I think it's an excellent report. I really appreciate you adding the additional data points and the comparisons. You mentioned restorative practices, and we got a tutorial from Jason Messenger at West Middle School the other day on restorative practices, and I don't know, at least I have a much better understanding of that. And I think the report also shows how important our end statement, respect for cultures other than their own, given the diversity and the number of languages spoken by our students. So That is a great report. Thank you very much.
And you mentioned Jason, all three of our middle schools on our last professional development day focused on climate and culture in their buildings. And they looked at behaviors that they're seeing and how they might be able to impact those behaviors that are less than desirable. So there's a concerted effort amongst the three schools to all focus on that and do what they can to meet their individual challenges in their buildings. So kudos to the middle schools for doing that.
Yeah, good. I think we should approve this monitoring report. There's a motion on page 34, please.
Mr. President, I move that the Board of Education accept monitoring report 1.5 ends as a reasonable interpretation and evidence of compliance with policy.
Thank you, Kimberly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Yeah. All those in favor of approving monitoring report 1.5, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The monitoring report is approved. And now we'll move to monitoring report 2.4, financial planning and budgeting.
This report is far less interesting and exciting, but it is essentially the same report. The only that you've had in years past. The only updated information is around the unassigned fund balance. We ended the 2022-23 year with an unassigned fund balance of 14.6%, and the budget that was approved by the board for this year has an anticipated end of the year unassigned fund balance of 10.77%. And that may be just a little bit different after you hear the presentation on a budget amendment going into this as we get halfway through the year. So that's the only thing I want to draw your attention to. The rest of them just talks about our insurance assurance that we're adhering to your policy.
Any questions, comments for Mark? Great report, Mark. Thank you. There's a motion on page 49, please.
President Van Antwerp, make the motion that the Board of Education accept monitoring report 2.4, financial planning budgeting, as a reasonable interpretation and evidence of compliance with policy.
Thank you, Keith. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Terry. All those in favor of approving? Emma?
We both did, so give it to her.
All right, all those in favor of approving monitoring report 2.4, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The monitoring report is approved. And now we'll move to our only required action item, the building and site sinking fund. Mark?
So, yeah, I can definitely handle this. The building and site sinking fund, it's our recommendation, and this was, if you remember, pulled off of the agenda last time. There were some concerns that we had in making the recommendation to do this election in May. And so therefore, after reviewing it and looking at the costs, which we felt were, they're climbing because of some election law requirements, that it would have driven the cost of this election upwards of $100,000, because we were the only entity to be having a ballot question in May. By moving this to August, we don't have that expense. Our expenses are significantly minimized. I mean, there may be some incidental costs, but nothing approaching near to that earlier amount. So it's my recommendation that we hold off on this election until August. This resolution that's in your packet reflects that change from the last resolution that was in your packet to the adjusted one. I do mention in here, it is mentioned in here that our current rate, because of Headley rollbacks, is 4.4988, which is less than the $500,000 that was originally authorized, rolled back to Headley. There may be a slightly further reduction in that rate because of the financial situation by waiting until we go into August. So that's a slight change and a risk. The other thing, if for some reason it does not pass in August, we would have to take this back and put it on the ballot in November, which as a major election, presidential election, we would be much further down on the ballot on that. And the chances of people paying attention to that is lessened. So we want to make sure that August is well advertised and well known, and we'll be doing that to bring that to people's attention. This generates approximately $1.5 million a year. Our community has been very, very supportive of this all along the way, so it is a renewal, and we can still market it that way. So that's all I have for you regarding that.
Any questions for Mark? Very good. There's a motion, please, on page 56.
President Van Antwerp, I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution certifying proposal to renew building and site sinking fund as presented.
Thank you, Terry. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Keith. All those in favor of approving the building and site sinking fund election, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes, and the building and site sinking fund will be on the ballot in August. We'll move to our discussion items now, and the first one is the West Middle School servery equipment purchase.
And Sammy Stevens is here to give you an update on it. New face at the podium here. Thank you.
Good evening, Superintendent Beeling and Board of Education. Tonight in your board packet, you will find a recommendation for purchase of new food service equipment at West Middle School. This is through Stafford Smith. So a little background on this purchase. There is too much fund balance in the food service fund due to all the free meals that were served during the COVID pandemic. And the state has now required us to develop and submit a spend down budget, which has since been approved by the state. In that budget was remodel and new equipment for the WMS, or the West Middle School serving area. Not only will this provide them with the new space, but it'll also bring them up to the same caliber as the Central Middle School and North Middle School serving area. We've been working very closely with Tower Pinkster on this. This is part one of a two-part project. That second part is currently out for bid, and we will be receiving those bids on the 19th. This project, we went out formally for bid, received 3 bids. That bid tab is in your packet. But Stafford Smith was the lowest bidder for this project. So tonight, I recommend that the Board of Education approve the purchase of $158,612 from Stafford Smith for new food service equipment at West Middle School. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
I'll just say that when we took the tour at West, we saw exactly where the area was and what the plan was for doing it, and it will make a whole lot more sense and expedite kids through there so much more efficiently. So this is a good project.
Yes, agreed, very much so.
Thank you. Our next discussion item is the MASB Board of Directors election. And you have this information in your packet. And it'll be up to us as a board at our next meeting to pick one of these candidates to fill the Board of Directors position. And you can see Region 6, Pamela Dickinson is the incumbent. She's the board president in Comstock and has served on the Board of Directors for several years. There's also Robert Becker from the Berry Intermediate School District, and 2 others, Elizabeth Odell from St. Joseph, and the last one is Mr. Andrew Robinson. And their qualifications are all laid out there, and at our next meeting, we'll be choosing one of those folks to represent us on the Board of Directors elections. Any questions about that? Great. Now we're getting to the budget amendment, and Paula. And Sammy. It's too big for one person.
Before I go into details on the budget amendment, I just want to give kudos to Sam. Last week, I unfortunately came down with COVID. And we've been working on this budget amendment since December. And Sammy stepped up, and you guys all got your packet. And I was sitting at home working with her remotely and on the phone. finish the budget amendment. She deserves a lot of credit for everything that she did. Okay, I don't know that this presentation will be as exciting as the Super Bowl game was last night, but here we go. Good evening, Superintendent Beeling and trustees. I'd like to take you back to June of 2023, when we adopted our preliminary budget, just to give you some background information to help bring it to the forefront to walk you forward with the budget amendment. When I built the budget last June, I had planned for a $400 increase to the foundation allowance. So I planned the budget on a foundation allowance of $9,550. I guesstimated blended enrollment to come in at 8,592 students. Sammy and I came to you the night of June 19th for our budget hearing, and you adopted our budget that evening. However, the legislators didn't pass our state school aid bill until June 28th. So by law, we are required to pass our budget by June 30th, and we always have to put the best guess forward. On the expenditure side of that budget, what I brought to you that night, or what we brought to you that night, was a $1.6 million, almost $1.7 million deficit, where expenditures exceeded revenue. Because there are a lot of things that are unknown at that time when we adopt the budget. We didn't have settled contracts with two of our employee groups, the teachers union and maintenance and operations. Those contracts were not settled at the time that we came to you. I would also like to bring to the board's attention that in that preliminary budget that I brought to you, it did not include any projects that may not have been finished in that previous school year. We had two major projects going for the weight room improvements, and those we were hoping would finish by June 30th. They ran into a few hiccups. They didn't finish by June 30th, so they were not in that preliminary budget. I thought they were going to be finished. And then we had some committed funds for 11T that were not in that budget for the preliminary. So what did the state finally end up giving us? Our foundation allowance came in at $9,608 a pupil. That was $58 higher than what I had budgeted on. They kept our enrollment blend at the 90 fall, 10 spring. That's what we're accustomed to. But they came up with a lot of new categorical funding in the state aid budget. So many categoricals that we're still learning about them right now, and the state's been very slow at rolling those out to us. We all know that breakfast and lunch is free for all students this year, which is a wonderful benefit for our students. They came up with a new transportation line item, 22L, and we have a preliminary number, but waiting for that final number to be awarded to us. They also started recognizing districts that are on a declining enrollment and developed an enrollment stabilization payment, section 29.7. And what this was to do was to fund districts back for 50% of their lost enrollment. However, the state didn't set aside enough money in this categorical to fully fund it because so many districts are experiencing a declining enrollment in the state of Michigan. So we're only getting about 72% of that categorical. Just like to point out our enrollment history here at Portage Public Schools. This graph starts with the 17-18 school year and moves forward through this current school year. You can see how our enrollment has declined. You can see that decline during COVID occurring. You can see the planned for decline that we had from the 22-23 school year going into the 23-24 school year. The preliminary budget, like I mentioned before, was built on the blended enrollment of 8,592 students. And we actually came in at 8,599 students, a 7-student difference. I was pretty impressed. But I also want to bring to the board's attention that this enrollment number still goes through a fluctuation process between the fall and the spring count, which spring count is Wednesday this week. There's what's called a Section 25E adjustment, where if students come in to us from another county or from a non-public school, we're able to submit for partial state aid on those students based on days of enrollment with us. So our enrollment will still fluctuate slightly through probably March, beginning of April, when the pupil accounting auditors have all those adjustments approved or denied through the process. So what did I do when I looked at revenue and this amendment that came to you tonight in your packet? As usual, I looked at our property tax values, which they did go up. But when our property tax values increase and we collect operating tax revenue, then the state gives us less on the state aid payment side. It's a two-funding approach on how we get our state aid, through between property taxes and state aid. I adjusted for that $58 difference in the foundation allowance compared to preliminary to actual. I do have to bring this to the board's attention. We are a Headley rollback district on our operating millage. We do not collect the full 18 mills of operating. We collect 17.5695 mills, and because of that, we receive about $419,000 less in operating tax revenue. I adjusted for all the state aid categoricals that came through that I didn't know about at the time that we adopted the preliminary budget. A large increase occurred in our UAAL rate stabilization payment, but this is just an in and an out. There's an equivalent expense in the budget that offsets against the revenue for this item. This has to do with the MIPSERS funding. The state did give us an increase in special education funding, 51A. And then we also touched our federal grants, such as 98C, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and 11T, so that they were set to current year awards. So the next slide brings your 23-24 Amendment 1 revenues more into a visual picture, or a visual for you guys. As you can see, we've got it split up into the four main sources that we have for revenues. Your first source is going to be the local sources, and that is about 0.5% from the preliminary budget, and that's primarily due to the increase in property taxes, and that's the primary source for your local source. But there's also the enhancement millage that sits in that area. Your state sources, your primary source is your foundation allowance. That's 69.5% of that 73.36. And it also includes those state categoricals that Paula had mentioned, the transportation, the enrollment stabilization, and the MIPSERS, which went up just over $1 million since preliminary budget. Next up is your federal sources. This includes your title grants and those one-time federal funds that we've been talking a lot about. Those one-time federal funds, so 11T, ESSER 3, and the new grant, the American Rescue Plan McKinney-Vento grant, that builds 59% of that federal sources section. So come September of 2024, that federal sources is going to go from 1.94% to even smaller than that, because at that point those funds are gone. And then incoming transfers are primarily the indirect from the food group. So for the First Amendment, we put a lot of work into this amendment, and we spent a lot of time with other departments on this amendment. For the expenses, we analyze every single salary account that is in the general ledger, and there are well over 5,000 accounts in that general ledger, even after attempting to inactivate some that are no longer in use. And we applied the contract settlement changes for the PEA and custodial maintenance. We adjusted our insurance rates to actual. When we adopt in June, we don't know our 2024 calendar year rates, so we have to fix those for that First Amendment. We were lucky enough to have a 2-year quote-unquote freeze on our dental and vision insurance, so that was a nice surprise that we found. We adjusted the UAL retirement rate. That went from 16.65% to 16.89%. Like I said, we spend a lot of time with departments on this. We sit down. They're probably a good hour, hour and a half long meetings just talking about their budget and what they're expecting, what's happened so far. So every department budget has been updated. We've updated our federal and state categorical expenses, and we've added those unfinished projects at 6/30 of '23. So this next slide is broken out by object code, which is very similar, or which is page 2 of your monthly board financial packet, or report. Obviously, the largest part of the budget is people. The salaries and benefits alone are just over $100 million, and that is up $3.7 million from the preliminary budget. 55 million of that is salaries, which, like as it says, is 45.69% of the entire budget, and then 44 million is benefits. Your largest benefit costs are going to be your retirement, your FICA, and the health insurance. Purchase service also contains people, so really if we're looking at where all those people lay, it's the salaries and fringe benefits along with purchase service. In that purchase service is our contracted staff such as EduStaff, our subs, GRBS, our SROs, and the counselors that we've been very fortunate to partner with through 31N6 funding. That purchase service also contains expenses for professional learning and conference expenses and software contracts that fall out of the GASB 96 requirement, which I'll go into here shortly. Supplies and materials is exactly as it sounds. It's teaching and testing supplies, building and department supplies, it's transportation supplies like tires, oil, grease, gas, and athletic supplies as well. Then we've got our capital outlay. That is primarily the Central High and Northern High weight room. As we said at prelim, we were expecting these projects to be done at 6:30. A few hiccups, so we had to add them back in. And then that also contains like large projects such as the Access Point project that Dan's been working on across the district. For the debt, that is new for the amendment, and that is because of GASB 96, and that is the principal and interest expenses for that. And GASB 96 is a new government accounting standard that we have to follow. Went into effect as of June 30th of '23. And it's for subscription-based IT agreements. So basically, if we have an IT agreement for over 3 years, or for over 1 year, over X amount of dollars, we have to book principal and interest on that, and that's a really large calculation that we work really closely with our auditors on. So this next one is your expenses again. It's split out by function code, which is page 1 of your monthly board financial report. That's also in your budget amendment report as well. And it's also very similar to the pie chart that's created by MDE from the FID data that we support or we submit at, yes. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of the largest pieces because that's a lot to take in because it breaks down the entire district down to, indirect costs. So your first one's going to be instructional expenditures. That's the largest part of your budget. That includes expenses like teacher salary and benefits, parapro salary and benefits, building supplies, and summer learning experiences expenses. Then if you look at your pupil support, that includes engagement specialists and counselors. It's their benefits and their salaries, and then mental health support costs, which again, we've been very fortunate to be able to provide for our students. The last section I'm going to talk about is the instructional staff support. That's professional learning experiences for our staff, conference costs. It also contains our district math literacy, and the 6 through 12 ELA coach that we have. And then it also contains the English learner expenses. So this next slide is a lot to take in, and it has been updated since your June 30, or since the June board meeting. And we're going to talk about the federal funding because we want you guys to be aware that the funding pledge that we are about to hit September 30th of 2024. So a lot of this money was starting to be received in March of 2020, and that was primarily with ESSER, there were some other like little ones, district COVID costs, and it just trickled in. But come 22, 23, it really started to soar, and you can see that on that graph. All of this funding that remains has to be spent by September 30th of 2024. So a little under 7 months to spend the remainder of that funding. The 3 grants that remain, ESSER 3, 11T, and the ARP McKinney-Vento grant. That's about $6 million, which is about 30% of that grand total. Now, some of that has already been spent, some of it's already planned. The one thing to keep in mind is that with those 3 grants, there are very strict spending guidelines. So it has to be spent on learning loss, after-school learning experiences, summer learning experiences. It has to be spent on English learners, McKinney-Vento identified students, economically disadvantaged students. So it really has to benefit these smaller subgroups of students that might have struggled a little bit more through the pandemic. So that's makes it a smidgen more difficult. We have a great staff and great people working on those grants. I know Janet has worked really hard on that McKinney-Vento grant, and some of the items that she's able to provide for those students is fantastic through that funding. How it's been used, we've been able to purchase custodial equipment upgrades. We've done conference room upgrades to be able to hold meetings and conference type settings virtually. Summer learning experiences, after-school experiences. We've been able to keep up that one-to-one ratio for our Chromebooks with this, and it's been able to provide letters trainings for a lot of our teachers, which has been extremely beneficial. Okay, I want to spend a few minutes on this slide explaining something to the board that's going to look different than what you're used to seeing in the past. The budget amendment in your packet shows expenditures exceeding revenues by $2 million, but I need to explain the rest of the story behind the $2 million. Even though there's a $2 million negative there, there's a couple components such as the CIA committed money that we committed last school year that does not have a revenue account, and that money sits in a special part of fund balance under committed fund balance. So the expenditure number is going to look larger than what you're used to. And also, in addition to adding the weight room projects at both high schools, that's now in this amendment. So it rolled to fund balance at the end of last year. Project wasn't finished. Now we're finishing the project in this school year. So that was a huge timing issue. If you were to take out that $831,000 of expenditure, the negative number coming to the board tonight would really be a $1.2 million negative, which is more so in line of what you're used to seeing. This is, if you take those 2 pieces away from this slide, it really means that we reduced expenditures overall by a little over $400,000 in the amendment. We did a couple months worth of work for $400,000 swing, but there was a lot of work, a lot of cleanup, a lot of everything that happened in this amendment. A lot of things were touched. Based on the budget amendment brought to you tonight, we would predict that the unassigned fund balance percentage would be 13.45%. That's down slightly from our close of fiscal year 6/30/2023. But keep in mind, this is an assumption and an assumption only. If every single revenue dollar is received, every single expenditure is expensed, this is what our projected expenditure. The only way that we'll know for sure how it's going to end up is we're going to do another budget amendment for you in June, but we're going to close the books over the summer. So I wanted to explain why it was larger than what you're used to, but I can explain that. So the last slide just shows the history of our unassigned fund balance, starting with the 18-19 school year, and where we're projecting to end based on, if we were to end the year right now, and everything happened, it would be 13.45%. We'd be happy to take any questions from the board.
Thank you for that thorough picture.
Good.
So on fund balance, I mean, the number that I keep hearing is that for a typical financially responsible public school district, 10 to 15, around there. Our floor is 7, our policy, we don't go below 7, but we're right in that 10 to 15 range, so. You've gotten me used to over
It's a board comfort level.
Yeah. Yes, you've gotten me used to over the years, not looking at the gain or loss, but looking at the fund balance, so we're right in there. Then the other question I have is, those one-time federal funds, and you talked about the narrow uses of some of those. I mean, do we think we'll be able to use all or most of those funds for those purposes? I mean, those are really good, those are, noteworthy, important purposes.
Yeah, so those funds, while I say 6 million, that is all of those awards added together. It is much less than 6 million left to spend, just to let you guys know that. But spending it, it sounds very narrow, but spending it is a lot easier than how it sounds. Does that make sense? Our CIA department, Mackenzie Sheehan, Kelly Jensenius, Michael, and that whole department has been working with me to find ways to spend that, specifically around that learning loss. We have some really large purchases that we're kind of in the midst of. I'm just wanted to get this to you guys first, and then we'll go to those purchases, but that, yes, it will be spent in full. Yeah, for sure.
We have a couple ideas as well.
Yes.
So we still could be coming back with further recommendations in regards to that.
Correct.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Very thorough, and just confirmed again that our finances are in very good hands. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, before we leave discussion items, back on the West Middle School servery, I'm curious if there would be any advantage of having that moved to the approval item? Disadvantage
I don't know.
as far as timing?
We would appreciate it, because there's drawings that have to be done, so that's fine.
Fine with me. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, totally fine.
Okay, so Mr. President, make the motion that we.
We gotta move it to action.
No?
We gotta move it to action first.
Yes, that we move it to action for the West Middle School servery equipment purchase.
Thank you, Keith. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of moving the servery purchase to an action item, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We're now looking at an action item.
Now, I will make a motion to approve the West Middle School servery equipment as presented.
Thank you, Keith. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Kimberly. All in favor of purchasing the West Middle School server equipment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes. Thank you, Keith. We now need a motion to go into closed session, and Barb put a suggested motion at your seats.
President Antwerp moved that the board go into closed session to consider the legal counsel's opinion pursuant to Section 8E of the Open Meetings Act to discuss litigation and settlement strategy regarding the Coffron versus Portage Public School et al. Lawsuit, with counsel participating via cell phone.
Thank you, Terry. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. This is a roll call vote.
Mr. Kroll,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mrs. Navaria,
Yes.
Mr. Van Antwerp,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Ms. Hamilton,
Yes.
Ms. Larson.
Yes.
Very good. The motion passes, and we'll be going to closed session, and we're going to sit right where we are.
Let's ask everyone to leave.
Thank you.
Down to.
That's where,
Here, I can give her these too. Randy, these were some things I had to sign.
Yeah.
I'll pass these out while we're transitioning, and then if anyone needs to use the restroom, and then I'll get Mark Ostrowski on the line, our attorney.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No,
Does not look like it.
Try live.
You got it up too?
What?
Yeah.